All right, welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this because, well, we're about to embark on a seriously fascinating evolutionary journey. We're going to trace the history and the DNA of the world's most debated, beloved, and, let's be honest, occasionally chaotic sport. So let's dive right in with a question that has probably started arguments in pubs and living rooms literally all over the globe. Who actually owns the word football? I mean, depending on where you are right now, that word could mean association football, soccer, or it might conjure up images of gridiron in the US or Canada. If you're in Australia, it's Australian rules. Over in Ireland, it's Gaelic. And in parts of the UK or New Zealand, you're definitely thinking of rugby. We've got this massive global naming confusion, but the premise we're exploring today is actually pretty simple. No single sport owns the word. They're all just relatives in the exact same massive family tree. Here is our evolutionary roadmap for this explainer. We'll hit 1. What exactly is football? 2. The ancient ancestors. 3. Medieval mobs and royal bands. 4. Codifying the chaos. And finally, 5. The modern football family. Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1. What exactly is football? Uniting the codes. The absolutely crucial point here is that football is actually an umbrella term. It refers to football codes, essentially a family of team sports. And the shared objective across all of them? Get an inflatable ball over a goal line, into a goal or between goalposts. Oh, and you have to do it using just your body, so no sticks or bats like you'd see in hockey or baseball. Whether you're carrying it, throwing it, or kicking it, if it fits that definition and shares that historical lineage, it's a football code. Simple as that. Now, what's really helpful for wrapping our heads around this is dividing this giant family tree into two main behavioral branches. You've got the carrying codes and you've got the kicking codes. The carrying codes, think American, Canadian, Australian, and rugby, allow the ball to be held in your hands and run down the field. On the flip side, the kicking codes, like association football or soccer and Gaelic football, they heavily restrict hand use, so you're moving the ball primarily with your feet. Moving on to Section 2, the ancient ancestors. From China to Rome. This human instinct to just get out there and play ball games, it's completely universal. Spanning wildly different continents and eras, humans have literally been kicking stuffed or inflated balls around for millennia. Look back to the rough, rugby-like games of Episkyros and Harpastum in ancient Greece and Rome around 388 BC. Then we see a super similar competitive spirit in Kuzhu over in Han Dynasty China around 200 BC. Fast forward to 1586. English explorers actually find Inuit in Greenland playing a form of ice football. No way, right? And then in 1841, historians documented Indigenous Australians playing Martingrook, which was this game of drop-kicking and leaping to catch a possum skin ball. But what's really fascinating here is that Han Dynasty game of Kuzhu. Actually, FIFA, the international governing body of soccer, officially recognizes this ancient Chinese competitive game as the very earliest form of football. It originated around the 2nd or 3rd century BC, and players had to pass a ball between teammates without letting it touch the ground, eventually kicking it through a circular hole in the middle of the pitch. Talk about tough. All right, let's get into Section 3, medieval mobs and royal bands, or as I like to call it, total chaos. If you think modern sports rivalries are intense today, let me introduce you to mob football. This was an era of lawless, brutally violent clashes. I want you to imagine entire neighboring towns or villages clashing en masse. No limits on the number of players whatsoever. And the goal? To force an inflated animal's bladder, usually a pig's by the way, across miles of open countryside to the opponent's parish church or specific geographical point. It was essentially a massive town-wide brawl, completely disguised as a game, and usually played on major religious festivals. Just wild. Now, as you might guess, the authorities absolutely hated this. Nicholas de Farndone, the Lord Mayor of London in 1314, issued a decree in French, which was the language of the upper class back then, stating with absolute haughty exasperation, "For as much as there is great noise in the city caused by hustling over large footballs, we command and forbid on behalf of the king." To high society, it was simply too noisy, way too destructive, and just terrible for public order. 30. That is the number of times football was officially banned in England alone between 1314 and 1667. 30 times. Kings and mayors tried again and again and again under threat of imprisonment to stop people from playing. But the sheer stubbornness of these players, it's amazing. The common people just refused to quit their game. Which brings us to Section 4, codifying the chaos. The Victorian Labs. So, the modern rules of football were basically genetically engineered in the 19th century by English public boarding schools. But here's the catch.
They didn't all agree on the rules. Why? Geography, of all things. Schools like Charterhouse and Eton had restricted, confined playing areas, like hard stone cloisters. You couldn't exactly tackle a kid onto a stone floor, right? So they developed strict, fast dribbling games. Meanwhile, schools like Rugby and Marlborough had these massive, grassy open fields. This allowed for a much rougher, tumbling game where picking up and running with the ball was heavily championed. So simple physical constraints literally split the football family tree right down the middle. Once rail transport boomed in the 1840s, these schools and clubs could finally travel to play each other, which totally forced them to agree on rule books. The sport organized itself at lightning speed. In 1857, the world's oldest surviving independent club, Sheffield FC, was formed. Barely a decade later, in 1869, across the Atlantic, Rutgers and Princeton played the first American intercollegiate game. And in 1871, the very first international match took place between Scotland and England, which, fun fact, was actually a rugby match. The modern sports industry was officially born. Let's head into our final chapter, Section 5, the modern football family, the great branching. Consider how the American game built upon its rugby ancestors. It's a true gridiron mutation. It all starts in 1874, when McGill University from Canada went down to play Harvard. They mixed McGill's rugby rules with Harvard's local kicking game, and it really caught on. But by 1880, Walter Camp, the guy we now consider the father of American football, wanted more structure. He completely abolished the chaotic rugby scrum and invented the line of scrimmage and down and distance rules. Still, the game was incredibly brutal. By 1905, injuries were so severe that U.S. President Teddy Roosevelt personally intervened, strongly urging safety reforms. This direct pressure led to the 1906 introduction of the legal forward pass. That was a massive genetic divergence from traditional rugby, designed specifically to open up the field and reduce those nasty collisions. Meanwhile, back in England, a massive split happened in 1895. And it wasn't because of the rules, but because of social class. The Rugby Football Union flat out banned any players from being paid, but Northern English clubs were largely made up of working-class men, like miners and factory workers. They literally couldn't afford to take a Saturday off to play without broken time payments to replace their lost wages. The central friction point was that authorities in the wealthy South absolutely refused to bend. So, what happened? The Northern clubs broke away, forming what would eventually become Rugby League. To make their new professional game a better spectator sport to help pay those wages, they changed the rules. They reduced the team to 13 players and eventually introduced the concept of tackles or downs. So class and economics quite literally tore a sport right in half. And all across the globe, these branches kept rooting themselves with very specific purposes. Down in Melbourne in 1858, Tom Wills created a game with an oval ball and spectacular high marking, specifically to keep Australian cricketers fit during the winter, giving birth to Australian rules. A few years later, in 1863, the London Football Association officially banned running with the ball and hacking opponents in the shins, finalizing the real blueprint for modern soccer. Over in Ireland in 1887, the Gaelic Athletic Association formalized Gaelic football rules, deliberately doing so to preserve their heritage and resist these imported British games. And by 1904, the association code was so globally massive that FIFA was founded in Paris just to manage the exploding globalization of the sport. Which brings us to a final, provocative thought I want to leave you with. When you look at a soccer player expertly dribbling, an American quarterback throwing a perfect spiral, or an Aussie rules player leaping high into the air for a mark, which branch of the family tree represents the truest form of the original game? From a violently chaotic medieval town brawl over a pig's bladder to multi-billion-dollar global industries, they all share the exact same bloodline. It's kind of crazy to think about. So the next time someone argues about who owns the word football, well, now you know the real story. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.